The marble halls of the Roman Empire echoed with the whispers of absolute power, a dangerous game where one wrong move meant annihilation. Seneca the Younger knew this arena intimately, navigating its treacherous currents as a deeply influential advisor. Yet, in an instant, the emperor's favor vanished, replacing his vast estates and political supremacy with a sudden, devastating decree. He was banished to Corsica, a rugged, unforgiving island that felt like the edge of the world. Standing on that desolate shoreline, the shock of losing everything would have easily broken an ordinary mind. The sudden transformation from a powerful statesman to a disgraced outcast was a catastrophic blow to his ego and identity. Stripped of his wealth, his network, and his voice in the Senate, he faced a sprawling, terrifying emptiness. The deafening silence of the island threatened to consume him, offering a perfect breeding ground for bitter resentment and endless despair. Instead of surrendering to the void, he turned inward, gripping the fundamental tenets of Stoicism like a lifeline in a raging storm. The dichotomy of control became his immediate anchor. He could not dictate the emperor's cruel whims, nor could he magically conjure a ship to carry him back to his former glory. But he retained absolute authority over his own mind, his reactions, and the narrative he chose to construct around his suffering. This philosophical framework dictated his daily survival, shifting his reality from that of an exiled victim to an active student of adversity. He established rigorous routines on the barren rock, engaging in deep contemplation and deliberate hardship. By stripping away the luxurious distractions of his past life, he forced himself to confront the raw essence of human existence. The isolation was no longer a punishment, but a brutally effective laboratory for testing his own resilience. Through this grueling process, a profound realization emerged about the true nature of freedom and wealth. He recognized that the opulent banquets and political leverage he left behind were merely fragile external loans granted by fortune, subject to immediate recall. True independence, he discovered, belonged only to the mind that remained unshakable when those external comforts were violently ripped away. His spirit remained entirely unconquered, proving that poverty and disgrace only harm those who fear them. It was within this crucible of isolation that he penned some of his most enduring works, most notably on the shortness of life. The sheer abundance of empty hours forced a radical reevaluation of how mortals squander their most precious, non-renewable resource. He observed that people guard their property with ruthless intensity, yet freely hand over their days to pointless anger, trivial pursuits, and the demands of others. Time, he realized, is our rarest asset. This ancient revelation strikes at the heart of our contemporary anxieties, where the fear of losing status or relevance drives us to exhaustion. We willingly chain ourselves to endless obligations, digital distractions, and the pursuit of external validation, entirely forgetting that our days are finite. When a modern crisis strips away our job, our social standing, or our perceived control, we often spiral into the exact despair the exiled philosopher actively refused to entertain. To reclaim our autonomy, we must adopt his fierce stewardship of the present moment. When faced with a sudden reversal of fortune or an agonizing period of forced waiting, the goal is not to passively endure, but to actively harvest the time we have been given. We must stop treating our days as cheap currency to be traded for future anxieties and instead invest them in cultivating our own character, wisdom, and internal fortitude. Beyond the desolate shores of his banishment, a striking contrast emerges against the frantic, blood-soaked backdrop of the capital he left behind. While senators plotted in terror and emperors succumbed to paranoia, the banished thinker sat quietly, mastering himself. The epicenter of the world was drowning in chaos, yet the remote, forgotten edge of the empire had become a sanctuary of profound clarity. The geographical punishment had ironically shielded him from moral ruin. His decision to write, to document his psychological survival, transformed a personal tragedy into a universal masterclass on endurance. The letters and essays dispatched from that island were not pleas for mercy, but triumphant declarations of a mind that had defeated its circumstances. He demonstrated that suffering is largely a product of our own judgment, and by changing the judgment, the suffering itself dissolves. The ink spilled in banishment would outlast the empire that condemned him. The daily reality of his environment served as a constant physical reminder of his vulnerability, yet he leaned into the discomfort. He practiced poverty intentionally, eating the simplest foods and wearing the coarsest garments, stripping away the lingering ghosts of his former luxury. This wasn't a performance of misery, but a calculated strategy to inoculate himself against the fear of deprivation. By making friends with the worst-case scenario, he eliminated its power to terrify him. We can mirror this fierce mental conditioning when our own carefully constructed worlds inevitably fracture. When a career collapses, a relationship ends, or a sudden illness rewrites our future, we are essentially banished to our own metaphorical islands. The task is to stop looking back at the mainland of what we have lost and start surveying the new territory for raw materials. Every shattered expectation is an opportunity to practice a virtue we previously neglected. This absolute acceptance of reality aligns perfectly with the concept of loving one's fate, embracing the obstacle as the very path forward. He did not merely tolerate his 8 years of isolation. He actively used them to forge a philosophical legacy that required exactly this level of testing. The emperor's wrath was the hammer, and Corsica was the anvil, but the philosopher himself was the glowing steel, consciously choosing the shape he would take. A profound, unshakable calm naturally arises when a person stops fighting the reality of their situation and starts working within it. The frantic desperation to be rescued fades, replaced by a quiet, powerful dignity that no tyrant can touch. He proved that you can lock a man in a cage, strip him of his titles, and erase his name from the monuments, but you cannot force him to surrender his inner peace. The blueprint left behind by this extraordinary ordeal offers a definitive guide for navigating the turbulent waters of our own lives. We must routinely ask ourselves what remains when our titles, our bank accounts, and our social circles are stripped away. By building a fortress of internal character right now during times of peace, we ensure that we will not collapse when the inevitable storms of loss and sudden exile arrive at our door. The story of Seneca the Younger is not a tragedy of a fallen politician, but the ultimate victory of the human spirit over external chaos. His transformation in the wilderness remains a beacon of strength, proving that the mind is its own empire, capable of turning the deepest darkness into a profound source of light. When we finally learn to master our internal world, no earthly exile can ever truly separate us from our purpose.